Okay.
All right.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Professional Experts Podcast. I'm Jim Cathcart, your host, and as always, our guests are professional experts. It's people whose business, their career path, is primarily selling their expertise as opposed to, say, a product or a particular service. And that includes coaches and speakers and authors and advisors and mentors and specialists of all types. And today we have a very unique and wonderful guest in that his background caused him to become a celebrity without ever having to want to be one. His name is Captain Charles Plumb, Navy captain and former fighter pilot in the Navy from the Vietnam era. He was shot down over Hanoi and spent 6 years, over 2,000 days, in captivity in a Vietnamese prison, and went through all the uh, uglies that come along with that experience. But when he returned to the United States, contrary to expectations, you'd expect someone that went through an ordeal like that to come back beaten and bitter. But he's one of the gentlest souls I know. He's a wise man. He's a gracious gentleman. He's a brilliant businessman. And when it comes to life philosophy, he's somebody I can always admire and learn from. So, welcome to the Professional Experts Podcast, Captain Charles Plumb.
Jim, thank you very much. Wow. The pressure's on for me to live up to that introduction.
Oh, I tell you, wait, I'm going to just keep layering it on.
Oh,
I've got
man.
a trowel here. I'll just spread more and more icing on this cake.
I guess. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you and a pleasure to have you share my story. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Well, uh, we've been friends ever since about 1986 when I first met you as a member. I was a new member of the mastermind group Speakers Roundtable, and I went to Coronado Island in San Diego and joined the group at the Hotel del Coronado, the famous hotel. And there you were. And we had the special treat, thank you, of going on board the USS Kitty Hawk. And you took us on a tour of that ship and showed us your old bunk. And we talked to the captain and we looked at the flight deck that you'd flown off of. Wow. I mean, that's top of the world access. That's super secret behind the scenes backstage pass that very few people in the world get a chance to see, especially in person with the guy who was in the room where it happened. Right?
Well, it was a real pleasure to show my civilian friends, my old home, my floating bird nest. And so, most people who have not been aboard an aircraft carrier are really fascinated. It's a floating city,
Yeah.
5,000 crew aboard that ship and about 120 airplanes. So,
That's smaller than some of the cities here around Austin, Texas.
yeah, that's true. So,
Wow. Yeah, that has a complete, I mean, all the things a community would have. It's got every utility, it's got a hospital, it's got
that's right.
name it, right?
Yep.
Everything. Dining facilities of various sorts, and of course the general mess.
Yes, and it's all self-contained. It can steam for month. Well, the new nuclear carriers can steam for a year. Of course,
Without going into port.
without going into port, they have
Remarkable.
ways. Have ways to replenish the crew with food and
Yeah.
letters from home and all that stuff. But it's no, it's really it's a fascinating machine.
Wow. I guess the only thing you didn't do on board was grow your own crops.
That's true.
Yep.
We,
Well, Charlie, you are the newest certified professional expert. You're number 42, and that's remarkable for us as the institute that bestows those. So thank you so much for joining us in this very prestigious group of people. I'm proud of what we represent because what CPE represents to other people is a model for them to look at it and look at people like yourself or like me or like many of our other CPEs, Brian Tracy, Les Brown, Tony Alessandra, and say, that's what a person can do with his or her own specialty and build an entire career around what they're especially good at. Now, your path was different in that you didn't come in with a skill set that was marketable as a
Mhm.
speaker. You know, you couldn't go out there and say, hey, I fly airplanes. Let me explain how. But the experience you had been through and the people you had been through it with and what was learned from that experience was so powerful that it applied to anyone in any field. And I've seen you present to all kinds of different groups. I remember one time we were up in I think it was New Jersey at a casino resort, and you were
Mhm.
presenting to the same group I was. And man, your message, your story was the same, but the way you tailored it to have meaning to them in their own industry was masterful. You would have thought Charlie only designed this presentation for this group.
Well, thank you, Jim. And you reminded me of the time that you and I spoke to that admiral's staff on North Island in
Oh,
San
wow.
Diego. and, and
Well,
so,
you opened a door for me. You let me into the inner sanctum. Thank you for that. That was one of the highlights of my career.
well, but talking about piecing messages together, because I knew that you were going to, I knew your presentation pretty well. I knew that you were going to talk about certain things, and so you might remember I opened the thing in a uniform, okay, with all my
Yes,
medals and asked them what they knew about me. Well, from my medals, I could tell that I was a Vietnam veteran, combat. Had Purple Hearts, had been wounded in combat, and that's what he told me about. Then I took
they
off the
read your
shirt.
uniform to you
They read the
in
uniform,
answer to your question. Yeah,
right? And then I took off the shirt, and I'm there in my T-shirt. Okay,
yep,
now what do you know about me? And of course, it led in to your presentation about finding out, the sociology of people just by reading the person and not knowing any of their background, but figuring that all out and ways to identify with them just by the personality of the guy and not by the
yeah.
uniform. So it worked out really well.
So I want to give our viewers a little insight. This was the direct reports, meaning the kind of the executive team of Nav Air PAC, the commander of Naval Air Forces in the Pacific, which is half the world. So there's two of
Yeah.
them. Nav Air Atlantic, I guess, and Nav Air
Airland.
PAC. And so
Hmm.
this admiral and his direct reports, all of these top level, literal Top Gun people like yourself, uh, that was my audience. And Charlie was standing there, of course, he's Captain Charles Plumb. And they all admired him and admired what his uniform said about him. And then he took his shirt off and he's standing there in a white t shirt, says, what do you know about me now? And I'll never forget the first response. You don't eat very much. That was so good and it was
It was.
brilliant. But then you had post-it notes and you said, what if you knew about my values, the things that were most important to me? And what if you knew about the intellects that I had developed specific to me? And what if you knew about my personality type? And you did post-it notes all over your shirt. That was brilliant. In fact, I have used that idea in my own training.
We need to do that again, Jim. We need to put that show on the road, babe.
Hey, I'm ready to take it. Absolutely. Well, Charlie, I want to show something. Look,
All right.
your original book, I'm No Hero, with a picture of you, taken back in the day. You were how old were you in that photo
24.
approximately?
I was 24 when that
24
picture was
years
taken.
old.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the
Wow.
day they was shot down and paraded through the jungle and then the streets of Hanoi, and then into a big celebration. I was shot down on their president's birthday. Ho Chi Minh was born on the 19th of May of many, many years ago. Well, and so I was presented as a birthday present,
Oh.
popping out of a cake for the president.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you had broken bones and I mean you were quite injured, right?
I was pretty torn up. Yep. But
Yeah. Because you had
nothing.
ejected out of your plane and then landed in the jungle and then they captured you immediately, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's true. And so, it's amazing. I had no medical care, but you recover. I mean, the human body is pretty unbelievable the way it will recover if you just
Wow.
give it time and rest. So, um, and I am,
Wow.
no worse for the punishment today. In fact, better
Yeah.
because of it, I think. I mean, and that's the whole premise of my message is adversity is a horrible thing to waste. And that you take
Yeah.
advantage of the adversities in your life instead of becoming bitter about them. You learn and become better because of them. So,
Yeah. Well, I've known well, let's see, I've known you and Jerry Coffey, who was
oh yeah,
also there with you. I've
yep.
met John McCain.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, didn't spend much time with him, but a little bit of time with him, and a couple of the other folks who were there in the prison camp with you. And what astounds me is what I was mentioning earlier, that you guys didn't come home whipped puppies. You came home as upstanding gentlemen, and your faith wasn't destroyed. Your attitude wasn't soured. You're astoundingly different than the product we expected from a prison camp.
That is very true, and people couldn't believe it. As a matter of fact, when I first arrived at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and that flight from Hanoi when we were released, and one of the first guys I spoke to was a psychiatrist, and I had just found out that my high school sweetheart, my wife, had filed for divorce 3 months before I came home. She'd held on for five
Oh,
years, filed for divorce 3 months, and so he interviewed me right after that, expecting me to go nuts. And
hmm.
he said, you don't seem to be showing much emotion. Isn't this a terrible news? I, it's terrible news, all right. He said, well, you said, you should go back to your hospital room and kick down the door, or tear up the pillow, scream, it's okay. Show some emotion. And he said, you have the right to be bitter. I said, Doc,
Yeah.
I have the right to have diarrhea. I said, I, I said, I choose not to be bitter. Thank you very much. I'm free. I got a doorknob on the inside of my door for the first time in 6 years. Give me a break. So,
Golly. Yeah.
but in the first, we went to the little commissary there at the Air Force Base. They were going to feed us a bunch of food, and they assumed we couldn't digest anything, and so what they had was Gerber baby food, smashed up rice. Okay.
Oh.
Well, that didn't last
Oh.
very long. Wait a minute, we want a big greasy cheeseburger and a beer, please.
Absolutely, with pickles and extra sauce and throw in some mustard. Yeah.
Yep. So, but you're absolutely right. They were all surprised and continue to be surprised. A
Yeah.
study was done just 8 or 10 years ago about all the combatants of Vietnam. 30.6% have PTSD. Nearly a third of the soldiers and airmen and sailors
Hmm.
exposed to that war have PTSD. Of the prisoners of war, 4% have PTSD. And
Whoa.
Yeah, isn't that
Whoa,
amazing?
just that's an overwhelming statistic.
Yep, yep,
30% of the general population of soldiers that were there,
yep.
4% of the long-term prisoners of war who were tortured and abused and browbeaten for years on end. Oh my God.
And in fact, the guys who were there the longest seem to have come back the healthiest. The 4% are the guys who were shot down near the end of the war. They were not tortured. They
Yeah.
kept their own clothes and jewelry, and then they were released just a few weeks or a month or two after they were shot down. They're the ones with the challenge. So, um,
Mhm.
there, folks are trying to explain that. In fact,
Yeah.
I don't think you know about the documentary that's coming out on my life and the POWs, but Ron Howard came by about 5 years ago. Ron Howard
Oh,
showed up and wanted to tell our story because it is a fascinating story that
yes. And
five,
it's an important story. Yeah.
it is. And 591 men have produced 18 generals and 7 admirals. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. 95% of the POWs from Vietnam stayed in the military, continue to fly airplanes and command fleets and battalions, and amazing. We have a number of congressmen, 2 United States senators, a vice presidential candidate, and a presidential candidate from
Yeah.
591 men. So it's quite a story that Ron Howard wanted to tell, and
It
that
certainly
documentary
is. Yeah.
is supposed to be out
Now,
sometime this
when
fall.
you and I did some collaboration when you had been to back to Vietnam and revisited Wallow prison and actually met face to face with one of your tormentors who
Yep,
could not acknowledge his role. And, I
yep,
mean, he continued to lie about it even to this day. When you're sitting right there in front of him, uh,
yep.
he brushed it all aside and continued the ruse. Oh my gosh. I certainly hope that footage and some of that material is making its way into the film.
A part of it is, as a matter of fact, and it was a kind of an unbelievable event when I met the rat. We call him the rat. He was a
Hmm.
rat.
Yeah.
This was the camp commander in charge of all of our torture. And the first thing when I met this guy, he wanted to hug me. Kind of unusual and not part of the Asian culture.
Yeah.
And he stood back and he said, "I just want to tell you that my proudest achievement for the 2 years I was your warden was to keep you healthy and happy." And I said, Bubba,
Yeah.
do you not remember?
Wow.
I said,
Wow.
how about these scars, I have on my wrist and my back? How about the fact that I showed up here with 2 testicles and went home with one? Yeah, explain that to me. So, yeah,
Wow. Wow. Yeah, the people's capacity for denial is
well,
evidently endless. Yeah.
it really is true. It's international,
Yeah.
but
Well,
it was.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. It was an interesting experience to go back,
Yeah.
and see this guy.
Now, I want to put folks back into your position after that, when you got back home, when things had somewhat normalized for you again, and um, and then suddenly you're going to the White House and you're meeting with the President of the United States and people at the top of the food chain in every kind of field imaginable. And then it unfolds since then. I would imagine you've met every president of the United States since you returned home. Is that
Most of
accurate?
them, most
Yeah.
of them, yes.
So just walk us through the early part of that process. Just the exposure to that level of embrace and acceptance back into the what we call normal world.
Well, I mean, it's a kind of a weird way to become famous, but that's kind of what happened. And in fact, you just showed the book. Title of my book is "I'm No Hero," because we didn't feel like heroes at all.
Of
We had
course.
not. we'd not accomplished our mission. You know, we'd wasted a gazillion-dollar airplane in the process, and then worst of all, we had surrendered. Surrender
Hmm.
is not in the Top Gun playbook. You know, they
No,
don't teach fighter
no,
pilots to surrender. Okay, you didn't learn to surrender in your military either. You
that's
know,
right.
so so we, you know, to a man, we felt guilty about being called a hero. You know, we are kind of just over there doing our job, and oh yeah, but you survive. Well, yeah, we all survive. You know, I mean, uh, people go through challenges in life, and they're not considered heroes. You know, when they survive cancer, you know, or when they walk away from a wheelchair, or when they give birth. You know, I have women come up to me and say, "I could never have done what you did," and I'd say, well, have you had children? Yes. You've been through labor and childbirth? Yes. Well, I've watched that. You know, I've watched my kids
Yeah,
being born, and I'll tell you, I couldn't do that. so, so,
yeah,
so it's, I mean, it's all relative. But
yeah,
yeah, the White House, Richard Nixon, he became one of our favorites because he was finally the president that stopped the war and brought us home.
yeah,
And he invited us all to the White House with our first ladies. Now, of course, I was going through a divorce, so I took my mother.
yeah.
And
You had a first lady recently removed. Yeah.
exactly.
So you took your mom.
I took my
Wow.
mom and to meet all these celebrities there. And of course, the president and all this. Irving Berlin, you'd be interested in this, being a musician. Irving Berlin sang God Bless America to us.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
so,
just pardon the interruption, but just to consider the historical uniqueness of moments in your life and mine, but in your life, the people that you met and spent FaceTime with in one way or another were are people that we measure entire genre by. For example, Irving Berlin as a musician, you know, Richard Nixon, a president of the United States, and on and on. Wow, talk about a Forrest Gump experience, right?
that's pretty true. That's pretty true. No, you know, I have a very charmed life. I'm a blessed man, just from all of the wonderful people that you know, that I've met and been able to rub elbows with,
Truly.
like yourself. I'm,
Well, thank you for that. But so when you first were asked to come tell your story at a convention or a meeting, um, walk us through that mindset shift because
well,
you're home and now all of a sudden you got to roll. Well, yeah, okay, I want to tell, but gee, I'm not a speaker. I'm I'm a pilot.
I'll tell you,
Wow.
the first 100 speeches I made, I was hoping, this was in Kansas. I was hoping that a tornado would come through, you know, and stop the meeting before I spoke. I mean, I was certainly not a natural born motivational speaker. Um, and in fact, they had to twist my arm to tell the story. But then I found, well, one of the first times I'm in a hotel and I told the story, and I'm on the elevator, and a guy sneaks in just as the doors were closing, and
Yeah.
he's got tears in his eyes, and he said, "Mr. Plum, you really got to me in there." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you know, my wife's filing for divorce, and my mom
Hmm.
just was diagnosed with cancer. I've got all these problems, and you made my problems feel more doable. You know,
Manageable.
I manageable,
Yeah.
overcome these challenges that I face because I've listened to the challenges that you have faced." He said, and I recognize, he said, I'll never be a prisoner of war and I'll have to go through the physical pain of all that. But some of the pain that you talked about are the pains that I have, you know, there's
Yeah.
pains of frustration and lack of communication
Yeah.
and
The
pains.
emotional pain is
Exactly.
universal. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when I decided that there was a purpose, you know, perhaps to my experience, and then a focus for my story that I could be of benefit to people with challenges,
Hmm.
It's a natural. I'll just continue to do that. And so that's the way it all began. I made
Wow.
400 speeches the first year I was home. The
Whoa,
400
pause.
the
401 year.
the first
That's
Fourth of
like,
July.
okay, it's morning. I must have a speech any moment now, right? Oh my
Well,
gosh.
the first Fourth of July, I spoke 7 times. They assigned an Army helicopter to take me around from one celebration to another 7 times on the Fourth of July of 1967, 1973. So it was
Wow.
amazing.
Did you find yourself asking, did I just say that
Yep,
I
yep,
did that one time, five
yep,
presentations, same one, 5 times in one day.
yeah,
And I actually said to the audience, did I just tell the story about so
yeah.
and so?
Oh, yeah.
No, you didn't. Oh, okay.
Okay, okay. I'll tell the story. Yeah, in
Wow.
fact, one of those 7 is in the congressional record.
Is it really?
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a wild time. And of course,
Yeah.
I wasn't charging any money for any of those 400.
Mm,
I didn't realize you could make money speaking. I did not know that. And so I did a fundraiser for a guy, and it was across town, and I drove, I don't know, 25, 30 miles. And he said, I want to pay you for making that speech. We've raised a lot of money because of you. I said,
yeah.
no, I don't charge anything. He said, oh, let me pay you for some gas. He gave me 3 bills. The top one and the bottom was a $1 bill, and I stuck it in my pocket. Okay, I got back home when I tossed these 3 bills. The middle bill was a $100 bill. I had never seen a $100 bill. That was big
Wow.
stuff.
Wow. $102. The first time I
$102.
got paid was $10, and it was for
Okay.
gas. And I had
Okay.
driven from Little Rock, Arkansas to Hamburg, Arkansas, which is 130 miles. And
Okay.
of course, round trip, 260, to
Yep.
speak at a JC's meeting. And like you, my first 400 presentations were free, but they were for Junior Chamber of Commerce meetings. They were
Mhm.
different type, but still, uh, it never occurred to me to charge.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
I joined the National Speakers Association when it was brand new, and built a career doing that. Now, uh, how does one? Let's say somebody listening to this has a very unique background, like yours is, but different, and they say, "Well, huh? So I could build a career out of this." Well, how does one think about that in making a career path out of telling your story and presenting and advising other people from that kind of a base?
The first advice, and I'm sure you would agree with this, is it's not easy. It is not easy getting on the circuit. Um,
Right.
and and forget about agents and speakers bureaus because they don't want you until you don't need them. And
That's
so
right. The only way they want you is if somebody called and said, "Can you get me Charlie Plumb?"
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, my advice to anybody who wants to get in this business is go speak. Speak a lot. Speak to Rotary Clubs, speak to Kiwanis, speak to JC, speak to anybody, any audience you can find, go
You
speak.
bet.
And then ask for critique. Record your speeches and ask for critiques. And
Hmm.
and you really do develop a style. Of course, there are a lot of really great books and YouTubes on making speeches.
Yeah.
And you've got one of the best TEDx talks around there, and
Thank you.
watch TEDx and watch the timing. That Jim Cathcart uses. Watch the stories. That we all
Hmm.
tell in TEDx talks. I
Yeah, and
believe.
Toastmasters too.
Oh yeah, Toastmasters is
Yeah, because
great.
that gives you a forum for practicing with familiar faces, but time and time again. Yep.
Yep. And at Toastmasters, you get some pretty serious critiques. They tear you apart in Toastmasters.
They do. They do. And some of them actually know what they're talking about.
Well, that's true
And
too.
last year in Santa Barbara at the Expert Summit,
Uh-huh.
I had some video guests drop in. One of them was Les Brown, and he was
Yep.
wonderful.
Yep.
And another one was Daniel Rex. And Daniel Rex is the CEO of Toastmasters International. So he runs
Okay.
the admin side of Toastmasters International. And he was talking with us about speaking and being a speaker as opposed to about Toastmasters itself. But that was a very good perspective to gain. Love that. Wow,
We had a
wow.
we had a we had a Toastmasters club in the prison camp.
Tell me
One
about that.
Well, there was a raid on one of the outlying camps, and so they all shoved us together into downtown Hanoi. The prison, the prison was not big enough for all of us, and so they put us in these rooms. I was in a room about 20 by 30, and we had 57 guys in that, in that little 20 by 30 room.
57 guys in one living
57
room.
guys, one living room. And so, but it was great because we were together for the first time. Some guys had been in solitary confinement for 4.5 years, and suddenly he's shoved in there with 56 other guys. And so, anyway, that was pretty
Wow.
amazing. So we started
Wow.
education. We taught each other classes and courses we'd had in college. In fact, University of Maryland gave us credit for the courses we had learned in the prison camp. No books, no overheads, nothing. So, but anyway,
Remarkable.
we started a Toastmasters club. And one of the guys had been a Toastmaster, and he knew of all the eyes habit and the
Yeah.
hands and the gestures and the timing. And I built a clock because we had to time, the speeches. So I built a little pendulum clock and a little escape mechanism from wire and
Yeah.
spring and a rock. And so I could time the speeches. But,
Wow.
so,
Wow.
but we did have what we call a captive audience.
Truly. That's for
And,
sure. Yeah.
but it was really scary, I mean, it was really difficult to get up in front of these guys that knew you so well and you knew them so well and try to give some kind of a speech. So I decided, man, I'm going to keep these guys awake. So I designed this presentation, and it was the presentation. It was uh, um, the opener. I've forgotten
Yeah.
what they call it. Anyway, you're telling about your life. And
Yeah.
so I told a story about God and St. Peter, and St. Peter's is trying to convince God that this guy should live. And this guy is in an airplane. He's about to eject because his airplane has been hit by a missile. And so, and God, hurry up. And so you're going through the book. And so here's his life. And I tell him about my life. Grew up in
Hmm.
Kansas, farm kid, Naval Academy, fighter pilot, Top Gun school, all this stuff. And then and St. Peter kept saying, "Hurry up, God, hurry up!" Because he is now ejected. He's spinning through the sky. And so the final word of my speech is, "Okay, St. Peter, open the chute."
Wow. Wow.
So
Brilliant.
yeah, that
Brilliant.
was my opener for the Toastmaster Club.
Well, and that became your signature speech. You pack your own chute.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
love the story about, you can see these bracelets that people were wearing that had the names of various prisoners of war on them. And people all over America were wearing those as a tribute to the person who'd been captured and a way of saying, hey, we haven't forgotten you.
yep.
And you've got some beautiful stories around that. Could you give us just a peek into that treasure trove?
Okay, sure. I think one of the most amazing stories is a guy from Albuquerque, and when he came up after my speech, he said, "I got to tell you this story." He said, "My 7-year-old daughter was wearing your bracelet. There were over I think 10 or 20,000 bracelets with my name on them, and she was
No
wearing
kidding.
one,
Wow.
and he said it was wearing a sore, and he would say, you're going to get that infected. Take that silly thing off. And he's, no, Daddy, I got to wear it until he comes home. And no, take it off. Okay, put it on the other arm. So she put it on the other arm, and it started to wear a sore on the other arm, and it
Yeah.
was an open sore. So she's sitting there one night watching TV, and he said, "That's it. Now you're going to get really infected." He grabs the bracelet and pulls on it, and it breaks. The bracelet breaks apart in his hand. And that moment, she's watching TV. I walk off the airplane into freedom.
No.
Yeah,
Whoa.
yeah,
Do, 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 do,
yeah,
do, do, do.
exactly. Weird,
That's
huh?
spooky.
Yeah,
Wow. The moment.
that very
Wow.
moment. Yeah. Another
Whew,
gal.
man,
I'm,
and
I'm,
people say, hang on, hold that thought.
yeah, yeah,
People say, this world is all there is. There is no spirit
yeah,
world. There's no, there's no God. There's no whatever. Really?
yeah,
Then explain this one. And that's
yeah,
not unique in all of time either.
that's
There are
true.
many, many,
Yeah,
many thousands of experiences like that that have occurred, and humans
yeah,
have no explanation that's even close to justified for how do you explain that one?
yeah.
Gee, that's
So I was in
wow.
a press conference. I had I don't know 200 or 300 photographers and reporters, all asking me questions and stuff. and and from the back, this was kind of an elevated thing, and from the very back, from the top, this bright red-head lady hollers at me, "Charlie, blah," and the place goes silent. "I've been sleeping with you for 2 years." And everybody's looking at her right here on my wrist. She's got my bracelet.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, but the bracelets were wonderful because part of the time in Vietnam, the bombing stopped when the peace talk started.
Yeah.
It's kind of a cessation of arms there for a while, and we wondered when the bombings. We didn't know why. We just
Yeah.
knew that the war is the war over? Have we been forgotten? And that's a terrible feeling when you think that you've been forgotten and you're some foreign
I would
country in a
think.
prison camp. And
Yeah.
to find out all those people wearing all those bracelets all over the country, it was very comforting.
That had to go back and heal wounds that had long since he scarred over.
Yeah,
You
they're
know,
very true. Yeah, very true.
yeah, it's just you think of healing only of a current condition, but I would imagine that had a retroactive echo effect.
It sure did.
Wow, that's so powerful. Would you, uh, I mean, I could do this for like 11 hours with you nonstop.
Okay, sure.
But would you share just briefly the pack your shoot story?
Sure. Several years after I came home from Vietnam, I was living in Kansas City. I was in a restaurant uh, with my wife and some friends. And about two tables over, a guy kept looking at me, and I didn't recognize this gent, but he kept catching my eye, and it was obvious that he wanted to talk to me. Well, in Kansas City, I was the first guy back from Vietnam in Kansas City, so I'd been in the newspaper, front page, all this
Yeah.
stuff. And so it wasn't unusual for people to look at me and recognize me from, from all the publicity. This guy came over to my table, pointed at me, and he said, "You're Captain Plumb." I said, "Yes, I'm Captain Plumb. You're the guy who flew jet fighters on Vietnam, shot down, parachuted in enemy hands. You were tortured. You spent 6 years as a prisoner of war." And I said, "Yeah, that's right. Who are you?" He said, "I'm the guy that packed your parachute." So I was
Wow.
dumbfounded. I stood up
Yeah.
and reached out a very grateful hand of thanks, and I couldn't speak, but he grabbed my hand and shook it and said, "I guess it worked."
So he was the sailor
He was a
who
sailor
was in the whatever in the
in the ship.
bay, you
Yep, yep,
packing the chute to go into the ejection seat to go in that plane, or to go on the
exactly.
pilot that goes into that plane, whatever. Wow.
Exactly. Now, the metaphor, I tell that story as a metaphor in my speeches, asking who packs your parachute. Who do you depend on? When you're in trouble. If you go back in your mind, what are the things that you've learned from coaches or parents or preachers or teachers that allow you to overcome the problem, allow you to survive that airplane crash,
Hmm.
and And so that has become
Assuming God says, okay, open the chute.
exactly.
Yeah.
You have to count on that. um, and then my next question is, whose parachute are you packing? Are you a servant? Are
Hmm.
you a servant leader? And because that's the most important thing in life, I think, is to help people overcome their challenges. And so,
Yeah.
so that
Hey,
that
here's a thought for you.
okay.
Okay, I'm doing speech coaching.
Yeah, no,
Here's
you're
like
always
I talked to the
you,
greatest speaker I've ever known, and I'm giving him speech
no, no,
tips.
I
No, this is just an idea, a thought. You just say, let's assume for a moment, and I'm just talking to the audience, that you have said the following statement. Hey, don't worry, I've got your back. Now, everyone in the room, say that with me. When I say go, say, hey, don't worry, I've got your back. All right, go. Hey, don't worry, I've got your back. And then you pause and you look at him and you say, so who were you talking to?
whoa, I'm taking notes, Jim.
Okay, because I can see you doing that. So
I'm
who
going to
were
try
you
that.
talking to? And then
Okay,
you can, of course, elaborate, saying that for all of us, there's somebody that ought to be the recipient of that statement. And everyone's in a position to be helping someone else. Who is it
that's
you're
great.
talking to? Don't worry, I've got your back.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
No, you're more than
No,
welcome for that.
you are so creative. You've always been so creative, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I've got a client, Dennis Madden, who's a CPE, and he lived in Oxnard for Ventura for the longest time. His business was in Oxnard. The Automotive Transmission Rebuilders Association, ATRA.
Okay.
And
Okay.
he hired me years ago for a small assignment, and that grew into a larger assignment. And they're still my client today, 20 years later.
Well,
And Dennis says, Jim, I've seen you in executive boardrooms. I've seen you on the stage. I've seen you in workshops. I've seen you one on one and then small groups. You are at your best when you have a problem to solve.
okay. Well,
And
that's a
I think he's right. When I've got an application like listening to you, and I think, how would I deal with that? Then ideas like that pop into my
yeah,
head.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen you do the same thing. We've
yeah.
sat in so many speakers roundtable meetings with our mastermind group over the 29 years I was in it. And man, the brilliance that just kind of bubbles up, it blows me away.
That's a great compliment, and I think it's true. I think you are at your best, when you're solving a problem. It gives you a mission, gives you a purpose, a raison d'être. So,
Yeah, and I was coaching a guy yesterday who is very knowledgeable, but has not had much mileage on the platform. And
hmm
I appreciate your saying earlier the first advice is get out there and speak and speak and speak and speak and get known and refine your style, delivery, and content and so forth. Anyway, he was um, he was delivering a answer or a piece of his message, whatever it was, and I said, "Hang on." I said, "That's good, but that's not you. You're reading a book to me. That's the
yeah,
way it's coming across.
yeah, yeah.
Let's make this more real." And I gave him an actual scenario, and his answer
hmm
was way better.
hmm
I said, replay this video later to see the difference in your own tone and demeanor
hmm
between delivering data and solving a problem.
hmm Yeah, true that.
Very useful.
I,
Wow.
uh, I keep thinking about your first question about how do you take an experience and build a presentation around a story that you've had. Last weekend, I flew up to the gold country in California, Columbia, California, where they discovered gold, and there's a lot of history around this town. And it was a
Is that
meeting.
Sutter's Mill?
It's close, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
It's not too far from Sutter's Mill.
Yeah.
And it was a gathering, an annual gathering of experimental airplanes. I fly an
Oh,
experimental airplane. Uh-huh. And and so there were
like the long
probably,
easy.
well, in fact, there were probably 15 long easies there and
Oh,
variations of long easies. And for your audience, a long easy is a very small carbon fiberglass airplane that you build in your garage, and it's safer and faster and more efficient than Cessnas and Pipers and Beechcraft. It's pretty amazing. My airplane, I get about 30 miles to the gallon on an airplane, and that's unbelievable. It's
that's
fully aerobatic.
unbelievable. Good or bad?
That's good.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, your car, very few cars get 30 miles a gallon. Airplane, 30
Right.
miles a gallon. Yeah. So, I go 200 miles an hour on 7 gallons an hour, and most Pipers and Cessnas will burn 15 gallons an hour, twice as much as I burn, and not go
Wow.
as fast. But in any case, so we're all there together. Now, most of these guys built their own airplane, okay? And they a lot of these guys are aerodynamic engineers. They've worked on spacecraft and all this stuff. They're big
Sure.
time. Yeah, and I didn't build my, I fly them, and so I made a presentation to them. I did a keynote presentation to the group. But the two guys before me, one was a brainiac, man. He had designed everything on AI and machine learning and all this stuff. And the second guy did not use computers. He was a trial and error guy. Okay. And he would
So you had John Henry and the steam drill.
exactly.
Two worlds. Yeah.
It was really amazing. These guys, and I ironically, the trial and error guy had a faster, more efficient, stronger airplane than the guy that did it with all the AI and computer stuff. And it was quite an interesting thing. And I,
Yeah.
you know, and I guess the reason I thought about that was I think, if you have a story to tell, and tell the story, uh, you know, don't look to other people. If you can design it and try it and it works, don't worry about analyzing why it worked.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and do it. Uh, you know, you know,
Man.
put your idea on the street. Don't wait. And I
And
think a lot of
there's an element in that that's universal. I do a lot of speech coaching with executives, and
yep,
invariably I'll be able to notice something that they had understood but overlooked, and that
yep,
is the the fundamental two parts of every concept, yin and yang. You know,
yep,
you've got the physical and the intellectual or the whatever, the day and night, and it's like a woman I was talking with yesterday. Her last name's Grizzly,
okay,
and she's a financial consultant. And I said, "You've got a brand identity just waiting for you."
yeah, oh
And
yeah,
she said, "The bear?" I said, "No, the bull and the bear."
okay,
So, bullish and bearish,
sure,
Wall
sure,
Street, take that,
yep,
and that's your yin and yang. And same thing for the aircraft. You got one guy that's Rocky Balboa, and he's training by lifting big old tractor tires and all that stuff and
yeah,
pulling weights with a rope. And then you've
yep,
got what's his name from Russia, who's scientifically training on everything, and it's
yeah, oh
all
yeah,
technology.
yep.
And of course Rocky ultimately wins, but that's not always the case. But still, in everything we do, there's that yin and yang, and both have their place.
It would
And
be
one
interesting.
without the other is limited.
It really is. I think it would be interesting to talk to all your CBEs that and find out how many people did not have enough information to actually make a decision, but they made the decision anyway. See, I think that's one of the real problems is paralysis by analysis. Uh,
Yeah.
we wait, we wait until we have all the right ideas to get into action. But it's well, it says ready, fire, aim. It says,
Yeah. Yeah. Was that Tom Peters that popularized that
yeah, somebody said
in
that.
Search of Excellence? Yeah. Let's see. Ready, fire, aim. Just a second.
Okay.
Oh, shoot. I had a good one. It'll pop back in. Oh, I know what
All
it
right.
was. I wrote an article this morning for Top Sales World magazine, and I was mentioning in the article a conversation I had a few months ago with Brian Tracy, who's
Right.
a mutual friend of ours.
Yep.
And Brian said to me, he said, Jim, I I studied for many years or a few years self-made millionaires. And I interviewed a bunch of them, and I knew the secrets to becoming a self-made millionaire. He said, and I wasn't one until I decided to become one.
Mhm.
And then, with all the information I had gleaned, it was a very quick, easy path for me. But I hadn't committed to do it.
Yeah.
And so it didn't happen. And that's the thing. So many people, they become a perpetual student and
Yep.
they never graduate and commence. And I think that
Commence.
moment of commitment is the big one. Like when you're sitting on the deck of that plane, I mean, deck of that ship in your
Yep.
plane.
Yep.
Oh my. When that catapult says bye bye, Charlie, you better damn well be committed, right?
Yep. That's very true. You're pretty much out of control. Once you salute the catapult officer and tell him that you're ready to go, hang on for dear life because
Yeah.
you're going. One night I got aboard my F4 and I put my flashlight up on the top of the windscreen. And yeah, and I
I
forgot
can
it
see
was
this
there.
coming. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I slid that flashlight. Okay, I got a 50,000 pound airplane. Okay, and I got a pound and a half flashlight, and that the catapult shot is so extreme that flashlight came back and it cracked my visor on my helmet. So
How many
yeah, you're
G's did you pull?
well, they say that you pull about 12 instantaneous G's, but it's all on your back. Okay, so it's
12
except
times the force of gravity
yeah,
in an instant.
yeah, uh,
Kaboom. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's not sustained, and so it's not going
Yeah.
to,
Thank heavens.
but it gets your attention. And if you're, in fact, you've got two throttles, okay, in your left hand here, and there's a little bar, a little steel bar that comes. So you hold the bar with the throttles because if you don't hold on to that bar, just got the throttles, the acceleration will force the throttles back. Suddenly, you're off the edge of the aircraft carrier at idle.
Oh, oh, oh.
Yeah, which you don't want to
That's
be.
right. Going forward is giving it juice. Going
Exactly.
back is shutting it down. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And
Whoa.
so, so yeah, there's a lot of
Whew.
things that go on in that cat shot, and
Yeah.
and then especially at night because there's a lot going on the deck of that aircraft carrier. You got all the other jets warming up. You got propeller airplanes. You got people running around
Hmm.
with flashlights, and it's noisy, And suddenly, once you're off the deck, it gets real dark and real quiet, and
Wow.
you're alone.
Yeah.
So you better come up with some ideas right away.
Wow. Well, I want to skip forward into something because I don't want to keep you forever. Well, actually, I do, but it's not fair to the world or to you for me
All
to
right.
keep you for a long time. But here's my question. You actually met and knew Ronald Reagan, right?
Yes,
You were with him in the White House, and I don't know how many other occasions. And
I
with
was.
our Professional Experts Summit, September 20th through 23rd of 2026, we're going to the Reagan Presidential Library near where you live and
Right.
going into the Situation Room simulation, where
Hmm.
it's actually laid out like the actual room in the belly of the White House.
Hmm.
And our group we'll only have 20 people max in the summit, and maybe 30 people if you count observers in that experience. And they're going to be playing roles. So I might be Alexander Haig, and you might be President Reagan, and somebody else might be Secretary of State and whatever. But we're playing the actual role of actual people in an actual situation that is presented instantly. We're all in the room, we get our orientation, and someone comes in and says, "Pardon me, Mr. President, we have a crisis." And they describe the crisis, and then they back off, and it's up to us to resolve it. So that's going to be a fascinating experience, but you are going to be observing that, assuming you can join us at that time, through the eyes of somebody you actually knew, actually more
Mhm.
than somebody, because I would imagine you met a number of the cabinet members.
Well, I have, as a matter of fact, and Ronald Reagan he was governor of California when I was released in
Hmm.
1973, and he stood on a spot at an air base up near Sacramento and shook the hand of every returning POW. In fact, we put a brass plaque on that spot a couple of years
Wow.
ago. Yeah, pretty
Wow.
cool. So that was my first introduction, was when he was governor. And then, of course, he became president, and
Hmm.
I worked on his campaign and a couple of campaigns that he was on. So,
Yeah.
what a guy! You know,
No
we
kidding.
we we need more Reagans in the world. But I've been to that.
Absolutely.
I've been to that situation room, and it really is amazing how involved you get. You know, you're playing this role, and it gets really serious. And the way that it is done there, of course, there's a kind of an area where you can observe everything is
Yeah.
happening and you see what's going, but then you go into the cabinet room, and express your opinion on how you should handle it. And there are arguments that go on, and fights that develop because people have various ideas of how to solve the problem. And yeah, I'm really happy that you're doing that, because
Thank you. Yeah, you get
it
emotionally invested,
you
and that's
really
what
do.
makes it. I did it personally before,
Uh-huh.
and I was assigned the role of President Reagan.
Okay. Okay.
Wow.
Good.
So I'm the one that got to pick up the red phone on the desk
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make that phone call.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. No,
Yep.
that'll be great. Of
Whew.
course, of
Hooah.
course, the whole library itself is really, really neat. All of the stuff
Truly.
Reagan, and of course, has got his plane, Air Force One, is there, and you go through the plane, and
Yep.
it's amazing.
Were you aware that I was the chair of the first public event ever held in the Air Force One Pavilion?
No, I did not know that.
October
Wow.
22, 2005. They
Okay.
had brought the plane, built the pavilion,
Uh-huh.
finally got everything finished. And
Uh-huh.
Nancy Reagan, First Lady, held a luncheon for all of the donors to the Air Force One pavilion. And
Uh-huh.
when she adjourned the luncheon, we came in and set up for a Boys and Girls Club fundraising gala dinner on the
Right.
floor underneath the plane. And we
Wow.
had to be careful where we stepped because the paint was still wet.
Oh,
And we
really?
raised, out of 409 people, we raised $248,000 that
Wow.
night.
Wow. That's
That
great.
was a big deal in 2005.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Remarkable. Well,
I did
Charlie,
not
I've got to
know that.
wrap this up out of respect to you
All
and
right.
our listeners, but I'm so grateful you joined me today. Thank you, because this is just wonderful. How do people reach you, and what do you want them to reach out about? Whatever you want to support or highlight or uh, feature, by all means, please do.
Thanks for that. CharliePlumb.com is my website. Pretty easy. CharliePlumb.com. And it's got all kinds of information there. It's got a place there where you can reach me directly. I answer all my emails, and I get a lot of them. But I'm always interested in perspectives, because everybody has a different perspective of adversity and challenges in life, and how you
Mhm.
overcome the problems of life. And so I'm always interested in talking to folks. Of course, my book, I'm No Heroes, in its 36th printing, and so it's been around a while.
Yep.
Every book that's ordered on my website, I autograph to people,
Oh,
and
wow.
so yeah, so I spend time, signing my name
Hmm.
in books. But I am a very transparent guy, and so don't ask me any question that you're afraid of the answer. That's because I, you know, I'm all I've got. I mean,
Yeah,
I, I try not to be pretentious about
you're
things. So,
certainly not.
well, thanks.
Man, well, thank you, and thank you. And that's thank you for being a guest today. Thank you for being such a wonderful, inspiring model to the rest of the people in the world. And thank you for your friendship for all these many years. I treasure having you in my life.
I right back at you, my friend. I throw you
Thank
the
you.
bouquets as well, and so we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. God bless you and give Susan a hug from Paula and me.
Kenny,
All right.
Paula as well. Take
You
care,
got
Jim.
it. Take
Yeah,
care.
bye bye.
Bye bye. There you go.